Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with another episode of Get Better at Yu-Gi-Oh! So last time, it's been a while, but we did a short discussion on moving pieces in this game. In other words, things that you can actually have tangible access to as resources in Yu-Gi-Oh! That allow you to make all your plays, play around your opponent, and pretty much really enjoy what it is that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Unique. The fact that you're able to do so much just based on whatever cards you have. Pretty much in this game, if it follows the guideline rules and you have the card in your hand, you can just play it as long as it doesn't break any specific rule. And that's very unique about this game. We don't have like energies like Pokemon, mana like we have in Magic. There's more freedom in this game. But just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And so today we're going to discuss kind of how to manage those resources and make sure that you always have plays available to you. There are many ways to illustrate what I'm talking about here, but I want to start with something that my brother loves using that I think is iconic enough for a lot of you guys as well. So Destiny Hero Malicious is a fairly famous monster, or infamous if you want to put it that way. It's of course a warrior whose ability activate in the graveyard. You can banish Mali while it's in your graveyard to then go and summon another copy straight from your deck. This of course lets you go and use it for Synchro Xyz, Tribute, whatever summon you would like. But the thing with this card is anytime you have a copy in your graveyard and then you have one in your deck, at least you can go and summon another copy, right? But obviously, if you're playing a deck with Mali, you're not just going to summon a copy of Mali for the sake of it. Unless you're like really low on life points and you need it as a defender or you will die, you probably wouldn't just go and summon an extra copy. You want a tuner monster, another level 6 monster, a tribute monster, something to take advantage of the Destiny Hero Malicious. And so it becomes really obvious in this type of situation, well, I'm not just going to burn my Mali just because it's an action that's available to me. If you guys are familiar with any automated platforms, whether that's the old video games or DevPro, you'll know that, these games give you the option to go and activate things. Heck, you all know Max C, it's going to ask you every single opportunity you have is a window for you to activate Max C. Would you activate it at all times? Definitely not. But this thought carries over into so many different things that you might not have thought of. One of the most recent decks that I discussed is Synchron, something I played here on Rogue Construction. It has a lot of monsters that come back pretty much for free. And if you look at something like Level Eater, unless you're going to change your level into something really awkward that you end up not being able to use, it probably is going to be entirely free because it can come back for all intents and purposes an unlimited number of times. Like, yeah, it might be like 3 to 5 times on a single monster or whatever, but like you're not going to really run out of summons on Level Eater, and so you can pretty much count that as an unlimited resource. But if you look at tuner monsters like Jet Synchron and Glow Up Bulb, I mean, this has been a thing that differentiated people in Plant Synchro era. People who use their Glow Up Bulb or Spore just because they could to bring out kind of a mediocre monster would end up struggling later in the game because they no longer had this moving piece available to them to then go for a game changer like Trishula or Hyper Librarian. It ended up putting them into a compromising situation because they didn't have the resources necessary to make a play when it really mattered. And the same thing happens a lot with anything like Synchrons, or, I mean, you could even think of like Burning Abyss or whatever. If you have a card like Jet Synchron, sure, you could bring it back from the graveyard with its effect, kind of like Glow Up Bulb, but if you're playing Synchrons, you probably want to hang on to that first effect so that you can get an additional card in, the form of something like a Junk Synchron Search, because that is an opportunity available to you, but only if you actually go and keep that second effect until you absolutely need it. So you really have to look at your strategy and think, is this the best play possible? Going back to Burning Abyss for a moment. Yeah, you could drop all of your Burning Abyss from your hand and then go and, seize your Dante and Leviers and whatever, but each of those monsters that you choose to special summon, you now have locked out your ability to claim those graveyard-based effects, and obviously you're not going to want to knock out your Farfa if you want to use your Farfa Banish effect that same turn, but, that permeates through all of your monsters, and you kind of have to have this overall understanding of what is it that you want to do this turn. What is it, win the game, or is it like get out of a certain problem scenario? Is it set up in a certain way? You need an understanding of where it is you're headed. And also, at each step of the way, the best tip that I have for anyone playing a complicated deck that has a lot of moving pieces like Synchrons or Burning Abyss or whatever is really think about, is this next play that I'm considering going to make my position better than it is right now? So if you can bring back a Jet Synchron onto maybe like a Mathematician and go for a level 4 Synchro, is that level 4 Synchro really worth playing right now? Or would you be better off just, I don't know, summoning something else? Like, again, we don't have a specific hand here, so it's a bit difficult to show, but do you even need to make that play, or would it be better off saved until later? Again, the big message here about conserving resources is just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And while I have spent a little bit of time here talking about overall decks and making sure that your strategy keeps flowing by making sure you don't make unnecessary plays and burn your resources, this also goes for a lot of the tech choices and supporting cards that you put into your deck as well. Let's look at the Kaiju line, for example. If you have a Kaiju in your hand like Gameciel, you could go and get over your opponent's, semi-strong monster and then start, doing some damage. Whoopee. But like maybe your opponent has a Dark Law or something, and you think automatically, oh, well, Gameciel is good against killing Dark Law, right? It's good for killing that. We're going to go ahead and play the Gameciel and run over that. But you have to think, is that Dark Law causing your deck a huge problem in that scenario? Because yes, in general, Dark Law is a card that will cause you issues. But if you're playing something that easily summons, decent monsters that can just run it over, why would you burn your Gameciel when you don't actually have an issue with the Masked Hero Dark Law that's on the board right now? It ends up becoming an issue where later you won't be able to use Gameciel to get rid of something that's more of a problem. Maybe you want to use that to get over like a totally awesome in that same deck that's causing you more problems down the line. So you have to think, you don't want to just go and play the Gameciel to do a little bit of damage and get rid of a monster if you could solve that problem through some other ways. So another example of don't play this as your one option if you have other ways available around it, because chances are the fact that Gameciel can be brought out for free later, or at least is a freely moving piece later, will give you a huge advantage when you do need it. And if you don't need it, well, I mean, it's not like you were put in a better situation by playing it early on anyway. A card like Swift Scarecrow, Battle Fader, anything really that goes and stops your opponent's attacks, you gotta think to yourself, we talked about cards as resources, but life points are a resource too. The game, nowadays, it feels like 8,000 isn't quite enough for all of our decks and against every deck, but you have to realize, if your opponent's not going to kill you with the monsters that they have on the board, and you don't need to have all your life points to make your plays the following turns, it actually makes sense to play something like Swift Scarecrow, Battle Fader, Tragoedia, anything that doesn't have quite as much of a time-sensitive nature on how you play it. You can go and just play this thing later, because, for instance, let's say my opponent has enough damage to do like 5,000 on the board, right? They could hit me down to 3k. Well, if I take all of that, I could still make a decent play on the following turn with an instant fusion or soul charge or whatever with that 3,000 life. But then, if things go wrong, or if I need the additional support, that same Swift Scarecrow could come down on the second turn after I've made my plays, if, again, things go wrong. And when I only have 3,000 points and can't survive with just my life point score, I can go and buy an extra turn off of the Swift Scarecrow. So in either situation, it's still one card, and it does the same thing in terms of saving me that same amount of life points. But in effect, that one card ended up buying me an extra turn because I used it later when I could not afford to take the damage. And in the first case, I just took that extra, 5,000 damage because I wasn't going to die anyway. Again, this happens a little more rarely nowadays with the decks being as fast as they are and being able to put as much damage as they can, but it's still important to realize, if you have that clutch Book of Moon or something and could block an attack, think to yourself, is it really best to play it now to save a bit of life, or to save my one monster? Do I need the life points or that monster for a play, or would I be better off just surviving an extra turn by holding onto it until later? And then this is by no means an exhaustive list, but a third example I wanted to talk about here is a card like Torrential Tribute. With Zodiacs running around, mass removal has of course become very popular. Torrential Tribute has actually come back to some relevancy in the meta depending on where you're playing. But the thing with Torrential is, Cards like Torrential, Mirror Force, they've always been valued for their abilities to swing the game entirely in the other direction. They're mainly played as an equalizer because they go and, balance out the number of monsters on the field, in this case to 0 unless there's some floater, right? But the thing with Torrential is, just as we would have seen a long time ago in the beginning stages of this game where card advantage was king, Torrential Tribute has the ability to go and make your opponent waste all of their resources. You let your opponent commit as many resources as they want. Unbeknownst to them, you have this Torrential set, and it's actually more threatening than just like, a Compulse or a single Solemn Warning, let's say. You can do a huge number on their board just by getting rid of multiple cards that your opponent can't afford to lose at once, that don't replace themselves for free, by using a card like Torrential Tribute. And in essence, what you do with these types of defensive cards is you then turn the table of resource conservation around on them and make it so that they cannot conserve their resources. Because what ends up happening if you address their threat? Well, even if it's something that they pretty much got out for free, let's say it was Zodiacs, they got their Rat Pier combo off and they ended up, creating this giant board. Yes, that Torrential Tribute essentially addresses that one monster along with everything else that they got for free, but now they're forced into a scenario where they don't have the luxury of just sitting around and having that as a backup. That now becomes the main play that they have to make. They have to commit more cards to the board. And then if you're able to, block that next step or prepare in advance with your own board, all of a sudden, it's not as uphill a battle because you can use cards like Torrential Tribute to swing the resource game more in your favor. So overall, I guess the main thing with Torrential is realize that there are cards that actually have the potential to get you more than just a 1-for-1 off your opponent, depending on how you play it. And so in those situations, you want to take advantage of it, make your opponent unable to protect their resources, and then basically all the good things that you're getting from following the tips in this video, your opponent will then suffer the disadvantage of not having been able to conserve their resources and save their plays for when they wanted to. As a parting thought, I just want to emphasize again that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very unique trading card game relative to Pokemon, Magic, and all these others in that our resources come in many different shapes and forms. Of course, we do have any card that we get into our hands we can pretty much use, which is what makes cards like Pot of Greed so ban-worthy in the first place. It's because unlike other games, we don't have a resource pool, a mana pool, energy pool, or something that we must use. But on top of that, we have other things too. We have, sometimes deck counts can matter for something like, I don't know, that grass looks greener, or sometimes life points matter or don't matter for something like instant fusion, or if you're just taking extra hits and need to survive an extra turn. So really, what you need to do to make the most of these concepts is look at all the different aspects of your duel, your cards, your life points, everything, and see what is it that I must have to make my play. What is it that I don't need quite so much of in this scenario using, this deck? Because again, it'll differ from strategy to strategy. And then how can I make the most of those resources, maintain my moving pieces to make cheaper plays that don't leave me stranded, while making sure my opponent ends up in the opposite scenario where they're burning their resources, running out of steam, and unable to fight back.
That's the end of the video. If you enjoyed, please like it so we can share it with as many other people who may enjoy it as well. If you want to see more of this series, you can click the annotation you see on the right, or if you just want to see the last video I did, click the annotation on the left. And if you really liked what you saw today, then I invite you to check out the channel icon in the middle to subscribe to JDGaming for more weekly videos. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.